I slid my little gift across the cold marble table, watching Jake's smug grin falter for the first time in 8 years. Congratulations, failure. We're finished. His words still echoed in my ears, delivered with the theatrical cruelty he'd perfected at Princeton, 40 witnesses, my birthday dinner, his grand finale. My fingers didn't tremble as I pushed the black envelope toward him. Before you celebrate, I said, my voice cutting through the laughter of his sycophants, you should probably explain to your sisters why their Yale tuition vanishes tonight, to your parents why their Southampton estate gets foreclosed in 7 minutes, to your partners why Meridian Capital just flatlined. The champagne flute in his hand stopped halfway to his lips. I stood, smoothing my simple black dress, the one he'd told me not to wear. Happy birthday to me. The silence that followed was worth every sleepless night I'd spent preparing for this moment. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand how I orchestrated the complete destruction of Jake Harrison's empire in exactly 7 minutes, you need to know about the morning I discovered I was already dead to him. 2 weeks earlier, I'd woken at 5:30 a.m. like clockwork. Jake lay on his side of our California king, his body pressed against the edge like proximity to me might contaminate him. The space between us had grown so wide, I sometimes forgot we shared the same bed. I studied the rigid line of his shoulders, remembering when he used to pull me against his chest in those drowsy pre-dawn moments. Now he clutched his iPhone even in sleep, probably dreaming of market futures and Princeton glory days. Our Westchester mansion was a mausoleum of marble and silence as I padded to the kitchen. 5 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, 3 garage bays filled with cars I wasn't allowed to drive. My bare feet shocked against the cold Italian marble. Everything in this house was designed to impress rather than comfort. The coffee ritual began. Ethiopian single origin, 15 seconds in the burr grinder. Not 14, not 16. I'd learned that lesson the hard way. Water heated to exactly 195 degrees. Jake had trained me well, though he'd never acknowledged the irony that someone with a doctorate from MIT was reduced to perfecting his morning beverages. While the coffee bloomed, I arranged his breakfast on the Wedgwood china his mother had gifted us. Egg white omelette with organic spinach, no salt. God forbid he consume a grain of sodium. 1 slice of sprouted grain toast, with precisely 1 teaspoon of almond butter, spread edge to edge. Fresh squeezed orange juice in the crystal tumbler positioned, exactly 2 inches from the plate's rim. The kind of details that look like love, unless you recognise them as terms of surrender. Jake appeared at 6:45, his internal clock as regimented as everything else. The charcoal Tom Ford suit hung perfectly on his gym-sculpted frame. His Harvard Business School ring caught the morning light. He'd upgraded from the Princeton one last year. Always climbing, always performing. He sat without acknowledging me, thumb already scrolling through overnight market reports. The investor meeting's at 10, he said to his screen. Be there by 9:45 to set up. Of course. I kept my voice neutral, emotionless. I've already prepared the presentation materials. What I didn't say, I'd also spent 3 hours debugging the code that made those impressive returns possible. The Pythia algorithm was my baby, born from my MIT dissertation, nursed through countless nights of mathematical modelling and testing. But in Jake's world, I was just the woman who arranged chairs and served coffee while he explained my brilliance to rooms full of men who'd never acknowledge its true creator. 3 hours later, I stood in Meridian Capital's glass conference room, arranging leather portfolios while Jake tested the presentation clicker. 20 investors would arrive soon, men with more money than imagination who relied on Jake to multiply their wealth. Remember, Jake said, adjusting his tie in the window's reflection, your administrative support if anyone asks. We don't want to confuse the narrative. The narrative. Our entire marriage had become a carefully constructed story where Jake Harrison was the visionary who'd built Meridian Capital from nothing, while I was the fortunate woman who'd married well. Never mind that every line of code making our trading platform revolutionary had flowed from my fingertips. Never mind that the algorithms predicting market micro-movements with 94% accuracy were born in my mind, not his. The investors filed in, shaking Jake's hand with the reverence reserved for financial profits. I served coffee from the silver service, invisible as the conference table itself, while Jake launched into his performance. The Pythia algorithm processes approximately 12,000 data points per second, he said, clicking to a slide I'd designed at 2 a.m. Our proprietary machine learning adapts in real time to market volatility. Morrison from the Connecticut hedge fund raised his hand. How does it account for irregular patterns during after-hours trading? I saw Jake's micropause, that flash of panic before he deflected. Excellent question. Let's table that for our technical deep dive next quarter. I stood by the coffee service, my hands steady despite the urge to explain. The algorithm used a hybrid approach, combining pattern recognition with anomaly detection, specifically calibrated for low-volume periods. 30 seconds. That's all it would take to answer Morrison's question properly. Instead, I refilled water glasses and remained silent. That evening, we drove to Greenwich for the weekly Harrison family dinner. The estate sprawled across 3 manicured acres, whispering old money, even though Jake's father had earned his fortune in commercial real estate just 20 years ago. Margaret Harrison greeted us at the door, air-kissing Jake while barely acknowledging my existence. "Lexi, dear," she said, the deer dropping like ice into warm water. "You can put the wine in the kitchen." The dining room was set for 8. Jake's sisters, Emma and Sophia, were already there with their matching investment banker boyfriends. Conversation flowed around me like water around a stone. Vacation properties, portfolio performances. The new yacht Harrison Sr. was considering. Emma's engagement party is next month, Margaret announced over the beef Wellington. The country club, naturally. Senator Whitman's son deserves nothing less. How wonderful, I said. Can I help with... Harrison Sr.'s laugh cut me off. Lexi, sweetheart, just focus on keeping my son happy. Let the women who understand these things handle the party planning. The women who understand these things. As if I hadn't been secretly managing their investment portfolios for 2 years, guiding them toward returns that funded this entire charade. They had no idea their trusted financial advisor forwarded everything to me for analysis. That night, I lay awake replaying his dismissive laughter while Jake snored beside me. At 3:47 a.m. I gave up on sleep and went downstairs. The kitchen felt different in darkness. Less like a stage, more like a space where I could think. I opened my laptop, intending to review code, but found myself staring at my mother's Facebook page. She'd posted about her book club, sitting in someone's modest living room in Ohio, genuinely happy in a way I'd forgotten existed. The next morning brought another performance, but something had shifted. As I set down Jake's perfectly prepared breakfast, I decided to test the waters. I need to visit Mum next week. Her hip replacement is Thursday. Jake didn't look up from his phone. That woman still lives in a rental? At her age? Embarrassing, that woman. Not my mother. Not the person who'd raised me alone after Dad died. Just that woman. She's having major surgery, Jake. She needs someone. Send money for a nurse. We can't have you disappearing to Ohio right now. The Goldman presentation is coming up. Then his phone buzzed. His face transformed. A genuine smile, the kind I hadn't seen directed at me in months. His thumb moved quickly, typing a response before he noticed me watching. He deleted the message and set the phone face down. Actually, I should head in early. David Lawson is coming by to discuss restructuring. David Lawson. The name triggered a warning in my mind, but Jake was already heading upstairs. I heard the garage door close, leaving me alone with his cold eggs and my growing unease. 3 days later, I was performing the quarterly backup of Meridian's files when I found it. A folder labelled Restructuring Confidential Q3. My cursor hovered before clicking. Inside were documents that made my blood turn to ice. A draft press release announcing David Lawson as Meridian Capital's new Chief Technology Officer. My role, or what should have been my role if I'd ever been acknowledged. The organisational chart showed Jake at the top, David below him, and 3 Princeton buddies filling out the executive team. My name appeared nowhere. The final document was worse. Operational Efficiency Initiative, eliminating redundant positions. 8 years of building every system that made Meridian function, and I was redundant. At the bottom, in Jake's handwriting, implementation after Q2, personal matter resolved, personal matter. That's what I'd become. My hands shook as I copied everything to a hidden partition. The quarterly backup continued while I absorbed the reality. My elimination had been planned and scheduled like any other business transaction. 2 days later, I needed air. The walls of our house were suffocating me. I grabbed lunch at a cafe near Meridian's office, sitting alone with a sandwich I couldn't taste. Julia Brennan, Jake's secretary, walked in with another woman. They sat directly behind me, close enough that I could smell Julia's aggressive perfume. I pulled out my phone, pretending to read while hitting record. "So the birthday surprise at Marcello's is all set," Julia said, her voice dripping with insider knowledge. 40 guests, private dining room, the works. Whose birthday? The wife's. But that's not really what it's about. Jake's finally ready to make the change he's been planning. You know, the situation we've all been waiting for him to handle. They laughed. I kept my breathing steady, eyes fixed on my phone screen. The poor thing still brings him lunch every Tuesday like some 1950s housewife. She has no idea what's coming. Everyone at the office knows about Alexandra. Everyone except her, Alexandra. The name hit like ice water in my veins. He's really going through with it? Oh, definitely. He's been moving assets for months. By the time she figures it out, there won't be anything left to fight over. Princeton boys always protect their money. I paid for my untouched sandwich and left, my phone burning with recorded evidence. I walked for an hour, letting the September air clear my head while pieces clicked into place. The deleted texts, the early meetings with David Lawson, the restructuring documents, and now this Alexandra person everyone knew about except me. That evening, I texted Rachel Murphy, my MIT friend who worked in financial forensics. She responded immediately, suggesting we meet at a Brooklyn dive bar the next night. The place she chose was perfect. Nowhere Jake's circle would venture. Rachel looked the same, red hair in that messy bun from grad school. She hugged me tight, then pulled back to study my face. "You look like someone who's discovered their house is built on quicksand." I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding as patterns emerged. "Lexi, this isn't just a divorce setup," she said finally. "This is asset stripping. He's not just planning to leave you. He's planning to leave you with nothing while making it look like you never contributed anything." She showed me similar cases on her tablet. Men like Jake don't just walk away. They scorch earth. They destroy what they leave behind to ensure their narrative is the only one that survives. Her words echoed during my drive home. I found Jake passed out in his study, Princeton reunion papers scattered across his chest. 3 empty Scotch glasses testament to his Thursday night ritual, drinking with college buddies over video calls, reliving glory days. I studied him for a moment. Even unconscious, he maintained that air of entitlement. His phone lit up with a notification from Alexandra. No last name needed. Apparently. I left him there and grabbed my laptop, heading to the guest bathroom, the only room where I could lock the door without suspicion. Sitting on the tub's edge with my laptop balanced on the closed toilet lid, I began building my defense. No, not defense. Offense. If Jake wanted to play scorched earth, I'd show him what MIT-trained fire looked like. The first step was creating Nemesis Holdings. I'd learned about offshore structuring while helping the Harrisons minimize taxes. Now I used that knowledge for my own protection. Bermuda for the main holding company, Cayman subsidiaries for investment arms, Delaware LLCs for US operations. By 3 a.m., I had 7 interconnected companies existing only in legal documents and encrypted servers. The opportunity came sooner than expected. That Sunday at dinner, Harrison Sr. complained about mortgage rates on their Southampton property. "Highway robbery," he grumbled. 7% on a jumbo loan. I looked up from my salmon. "You know, some MIT alumni started an investment fund. They're looking for stable real estate-backed opportunities. Much better rates, maybe 4.5%. Margaret's eyebrows rose, the first interest she'd shown in anything I'd said. Within a week, I was orchestrating the deal of a lifetime. The investment partners I'd invented had impressive backgrounds fabricated from LinkedIn profiles. I created email addresses, phone numbers forwarding to burner phones, even had an MIT friend pose as a partner for one phone call. The documentation was flawless. But buried in subsection 47C was a single paragraph about acceleration clauses tied to material changes in family relationships. Harrison's lawyer, more interested in his fee than due diligence, skimmed through on a rushed Friday afternoon. Standard stuff. Actually, better terms than usual. The $15 million refinancing went through. The Harrisons celebrated their financial cleverness, while I smiled quietly, knowing they'd just handed me a loaded weapon, but property was just the beginning. The real prize was Meridian Capital itself. During maintenance windows, I began fragmenting the Pythia algorithm. Like performing surgery on my own creation, I carefully separated components designed to work as an integrated whole. Each piece appeared to be routine updates Jake had to approve. He'd sign authorization forms without reading, muttering just technical stuff while already thinking about his next meeting. What he was actually signing were licensing agreements between Meridian and various Nemesis subsidiaries. The neural network licensed from one entity, predictive modelling from another, data processing from a third. Individually, standard vendor relationships. Together, they meant Meridian no longer owned the technology that made it valuable. The final piece involved Jake's sisters. During dinner, when they complained about trust fund taxes, I offered to help restructure for better efficiency. "You know about this stuff?" Emma asked, her surprise insulting. "I've picked up a few things. The restructuring I proposed looked brilliant. Better tax treatment, higher yields, more flexibility. What they didn't notice was their father signing as guarantor for obligations intrinsically linked to his property loans through cross-default provisions." "You're so sweet to help," Sophia said, air-kissing my cheek after signing, "especially considering your background, my background." I smiled and accepted their condescension, knowing their signatures had just completed an invisible architecture of destruction. 3 weeks after completing my financial trap, my mother called. She'd booked a flight without asking, simply announcing she'd visit for the weekend. Jake rolled his eyes when I told him. Ohio wisdom in our Westchester home. How delightful. Mom arrived Friday afternoon while Jake was at work. She took one look at me and pulled me into a longer hug than usual. She felt thinner, but her arms were still strong. She didn't comment on the house or furniture. She just studied my face with those sharp brown eyes that had always seen through my masks. "You've lost weight." "I've been busy." When Jake's BMW pulled in earlier than expected, I felt my body tense. Mum noticed how I straightened, smoothed my hair, checked my reflection in the microwave door. Jake breezed in, gave Mum a kiss that barely made contact, and announced he had a golf weekend with clients. The relief I felt at his departure must have shown, because Mum squeezed my hand as soon as his car disappeared. Saturday morning, after Jake left at dawn, Mom made scrambled eggs while I sat at the kitchen table in pyjamas, first time in years. The morning sun streamed through windows, and for a moment I felt like I was back in Ohio, before Jake, before I learned to make myself small. How long has he been this cruel? Mom asked suddenly. The question hit unexpectedly. Tears sprang to my eyes before I could stop them. "I don't know what you mean." She turned to face me. "Sweetheart, I watched you flinch when his car pulled up. You checked your appearance 3 times before he walked in. You apologized for the brand of tea in your own home. The dam broke." I told her everything through choking sobs, the systematic erasure, the Princeton boys replacing me, Alexandra, the divorce planning. Mom listened without interrupting, occasionally squeezing my hand. When I finished, she was quiet. "Then, your father had a first wife. She waited too long to leave, kept thinking things would improve. By the time she got out, she'd lost everything, not just money, but herself. She pulled me to my feet. Come on. We're packing you a go bag." We spent the afternoon filling a suitcase with essentials, clothes, documents I'd been gathering, cash I'd withdrawn in small amounts. Mum helped me hide it behind old skiing equipment in the basement storage room. "When you're ready to leave," she said, "you call me. Day or night." The Tuesday after Mum left, the doorbell rang. A delivery driver stood there with an elaborate bouquet of peonies, soft pink and white, expensive. I'd mentioned once, years ago, that peonies were my least favourite flower. They seemed gaudy, overblown. Apparently someone else loved them. The card was small, cream-coloured with gold edges. "Can't wait for your freedom," and my hands trembled as I carried the bouquet inside. This wasn't meant for me. Or maybe it was exactly the mistake I needed to see, Ikal. I called the florist, affecting a cheerful voice. "Hi, I just received a beautiful bouquet, but I want to make sure the standing order is correct for next week." "Oh yes, Mrs. Harrison," the florist chirped. "Mr. Harrison's weekly arrangement for Miss Alexandra Thornton." Should we continue delivering to the Ritz-Carlton downtown, Suite 1247? That's perfect, I managed. Same time? Tuesday at 2 p.m? As usual. He's been so consistent for the past 6 months. Ms. Thornton is lucky to have such a devoted friend. 6 months. While I'd been trying to save our marriage, he'd been sending another woman peonies every week at the hotel where he supposedly had client meetings. Suite 1247. I wrote it down with a steady hand, though inside I was screaming. 2 weeks later, Jake insisted I accompany him to the Princeton alumni dinner. We need to present a united front, he said, not noticing the irony. He positioned me at the wives' table in the corner, while he held court with potential investors near the bar. I sat between a plastic surgeon's third wife and a hedge fund manager's girlfriend who couldn't have been older than 22, both discussing vacation homes while I pushed salmon around my plate. Then I heard Jake's voice carrying across the room. Someone had asked about Meridian's algorithm, and Jake was explaining my work down to the specific mathematical models I'd developed during my doctorate. He even used my exact phrases from our early morning discussions years ago when we'd still been partners in more than just name. I forced myself to smile when the plastic surgeon's wife asked if I was proud of my husband's success. Across the room, I caught the eye of Thomas Morrison, my old MIT professor who'd served as advisor on my dissertation. He was standing near the bar, and the look he gave me was one of complete understanding. He knew exactly whose work Jake was describing. He raised his water glass slightly in my direction, a silent acknowledgement of the truth we both knew but couldn't speak. In this room full of Jake's allies, the next day, I drove to the storage unit I'd rented under one of my Nemesis Holdings LLCs. Inside, I'd created a command centre of sorts. Bankers' boxes lined the walls, each carefully labelled and containing different aspects of my evidence. Financial documents showing the systematic removal of my name from patents and contracts. Printed emails between Jake and his lawyer, discussing the cleanest exit strategy. The recorded conversation from the coffee shop where Julia had laughed about my ignorance. I spent hours setting up the automated triggers that would execute everything simultaneously once activated. Each envelope was prepared, sealed and labelled. One for the SEC containing evidence of Jake's misrepresentation to investors. One for Harrison Sr.'s mortgage company with the acceleration notice. One for Yale's financial aid office freezing the trust funds. And one special one for Jake, containing just 7 lines that would spell out exactly how his empire depended on systems he'd never bothered to understand. I locked the storage unit and drove home with the sealed envelope tucked safely in my laptop bag. Tonight was my 32nd birthday, though Jake hadn't mentioned it once this morning. Instead, he'd reminded me twice about dinner at Marcello's, insisting I be ready by 7 p.m. sharp. The pretense of celebration while planning my public execution would have been laughable if it weren't so cruel. When I arrived home at 4:30, Jake was already there, standing in our bedroom with 3 dresses laid out on the bed. His presence in our closet handling my clothes felt like a violation. He held up a red cocktail dress I'd worn to last year's company Christmas party, studying it with the critical eye of someone selecting props for a performance. "Wear something sophisticated tonight," he said without looking at me. "Not that black thing you always default to. We'll have important people there." I picked up the simple black sheath dress from my side of the closet, the one he'd just dismissed. It was elegant in its simplicity, bought with my own money before we were married. From a time when I dressed for myself rather than his expectations. "I think I'll wear this one." He turned to face me, his jaw tightening the way it did when I defied him in small ways. "Lexi, I just said, it's my birthday dinner, isn't it?" I interrupted, meeting his gaze steadily. "I should wear what makes me comfortable." Something flickered across his face, surprise maybe, or calculation. He hadn't expected pushback. Not tonight, when he thought I was walking blindly into his trap. He shrugged and turned back to his closet, pulling out his navy Armani suit. I sat at my vanity applying makeup while he dressed, watching him in the mirror as he fastened his cufflinks. They were new, platinum with small sapphires that caught the light. I'd never seen them before, but I recognised the jewellery box on his dresser. Cartier. The same store where Alexandra Thornton had posted Instagram photos last month, though Jake didn't know I'd looked her up after discovering the peonies. "Those are beautiful cufflinks," I said. applying mascara with a steady hand. "A gift from a client," he replied too quickly, not meeting my eyes in the mirror, "for closing the Patterson deal." The Patterson deal had closed 3 months ago, but I didn't point that out. Instead, I reached into my laptop bag and transferred the black envelope to my evening purse, feeling its weight like a loaded weapon. The automated triggers were set to activate at 8:47 p.m. exactly, synchronized to execute the moment I handed him the envelope. 7 minutes from that moment, his entire world would begin collapsing. The drive to Marcello's took 20 minutes through evening traffic. Jake spent it on his phone, texting rapidly while I watched the city lights blur past. At one point, he chuckled at something on his screen, and I caught a glimpse of Julia's name before he angled the phone away. They were probably coordinating the final details of my humiliation. Marcello's occupied the top floor of a boutique hotel downtown, its private dining room a study in calculated luxury. When the elevator doors opened, I could already hear voices and laughter from behind the frosted glass doors. Jake placed his hand on my lower back, guiding me forward like a lamb to slaughter. The room was packed with 40 guests, and my stomach twisted as I recognized the faces. Every single person was from Jake's world. His Princeton buddies, his Meridian Capital partners, their wives and girlfriends who lunched at the same exclusive clubs and vacationed in the Hamptons. Not one of my friends was there. Not even acquaintances from my MIT alumni network. This wasn't a birthday celebration. It was a carefully curated audience for Jake's performance. The seating arrangement told me everything I needed to know. Jake's place card sat at the head of the table, commanding the room. Mine was at the far end, isolated like an afterthought. But the real revelation was the place card to Jake's right. Alexandra Thornton, printed in the same elegant calligraphy as all the others. She was already there, wearing a white dress that highlighted her blonde hair, laughing at something David Lawson was saying. She looked up when we entered, and her eyes met mine for a fraction of a second before sliding away. "Happy birthday, Lexi," Margaret Harrison said, air-kissing my cheek with lips that barely moved. Her smile was the kind you'd give someone at a funeral, full of pity and uncomfortable acknowledgement. I took my seat at the far end of the table, surrounded by the younger wives who immediately began discussing their Pilates instructor. The champagne was already flowing, glasses constantly refilled by attentive waitstaff. I noticed how people kept glancing at me, then looking away when I caught their eyes. Julia actually smirked when our gazes met, lifting her glass in a mock toast. The dinner progressed with painful predictability. 7 courses of elaborate food I couldn't taste, accompanied by wines Jake selected to impress his audience. He held court at his end of the table, telling stories about deals and conquests while Alexandra touched his arm and laughed at all the right moments. By the time the dessert course arrived, an elaborate chocolate souffle with a single candle, the room was buzzing with anticipation. Jake stood tapping his crystal glass with a silver spoon. The chatter died immediately, all eyes turning to him as he commanded the room's attention. He looked confident, powerful, every inch the successful man he'd always wanted to be. His smile was the coldest thing I'd ever seen. "Before we toast to Lexi's birthday," he began, his voice carrying that particular tone of someone about to deliver a punchline, "I have an announcement to make." The room held its breath. I could feel 40 pairs of eyes shifting between Jake and me, waiting for the blow to land. "Congratulations, failure," he said, looking directly at me. "We're finished." The laughter erupted like champagne from a shaken bottle, explosive and effervescent. His Princeton brothers raised their glasses, cheering like they'd just witnessed a winning touchdown. The wives tittered behind manicured hands, while Alexandra actually applauded, her white dress making her look like a bride at her own rehearsal dinner. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I didn't give them the devastation they'd paid admission to see. Instead, I reached into my purse and pulled out the black envelope, standing slowly and walking the length of the table with measured steps. The laughter began to fade as they watched me approach Jake with something they hadn't expected, complete composure. I slid the envelope across the marble table toward him, my voice perfectly steady when I spoke. "Before you celebrate, you should probably explain to your sisters why their tuition disappears, to your parents why their house and cars vanish in minutes, and to your partners why the company dies before dessert is served." The silence was absolute. Jake's triumphant smile wavered as he looked down at the envelope, then back at me. His hand hesitated before picking it up, and I saw the first crack in his confidence. "Enjoy the soufflé," I said, turning and walking toward the door. "You have about 7 minutes." Behind me, I heard the tear of paper as Jake opened the envelope. I was already at the elevator when the first phone started buzzing, then another, then dozens as the automated triggers I'd programmed began their synchronized destruction. The elevator doors closed on the sound of Harrison Sr.'s voice shouting something about his lawyer. I walked through Marcello's lobby and out into the cool night air, my heels clicking on the pavement as I made my way to my Tesla, parked across the street. Inside, I opened my laptop and watched the dashboards I'd configured light up with confirmation messages. The loan acceleration notices, the system lockdowns, the trust fund freezes, every domino falling exactly as planned. Through Marcello's floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the chaos erupting in the private dining room. Jake was frantically tearing through the envelope's contents, while his father pushed through the crowd, phone already pressed to his ear. Margaret Harrison had knocked over an entire tray of champagne glasses in her rush to reach her phone, the crystals shattering across Marcello's marble floor like scattered diamonds. I started the car and drove to my Brooklyn brownstone, the one I'd purchased through Nemesis Holdings 14 months earlier. Jake never knew about this place. He thought I spent my occasional nights away at my mother's apartment or budget hotels when I claimed to need space. The 3-story building sat on a quiet tree-lined street in Park Slope, far enough from Manhattan's financial district that no one from Jake's circle would ever accidentally stumble upon it. This was my sanctuary, furnished simply but comfortably with pieces I'd chosen myself, paid for with consulting fees Jake never knew I'd earned by reviewing code for startups under a pseudonym. Once inside, I set my laptop on the kitchen table and opened the monitoring dashboards I'd configured. The number of missed calls on my phone had already reached 47, but I turned it to silent and placed it face down. The real story was unfolding on my screen in real-time data streams and system logs that painted a picture of complete operational collapse. Meridian Capital's primary trading platform had gone dark at exactly 8:54 p.m., 7 minutes after. I'd handed Jake the envelope. The backup systems attempted to engage, but found themselves locked behind biometric authentication they couldn't bypass. Client portals displayed error, messages in languages that cycled randomly, Mandarin to Swedish to Arabic, a small touch I'd added, simply because I could. David Lawson was sending increasingly frantic emails to the development team, each one more desperate than the last, demanding someone explain why he had no administrative access to systems he supposedly controlled. Rachel sent me encrypted updates every few hours. The Harrison estate in Southampton had received notice of immediate loan acceleration. The mortgage company was initiating foreclosure proceedings that would have the property in receivership within 10 days, unless $14 million appeared immediately. Yale's financial aid office had frozen Emma and Sophia's accounts after their trust fund payments reversed. Both sisters were currently locked out of their student portals, unable to access grades, transcripts, or even their university email accounts. I made myself a cup of tea and sat in my living room, surrounded by the blessed silence of a space that belonged entirely to me. No performing, no pretending, no walking on eggshells wondering what mood Jake would bring home. The irony wasn't lost on me that in destroying their world, I'd finally found peace in mine. For 3 days I maintained this silence, watching their empire crumble through data points and system failures while ignoring the increasingly desperate voicemails that filled my phone. On the morning of the 4th day, my doorbell rang at 6:43 a.m. Through the security camera I'd installed, I saw Jake standing on my brownstone steps. He looked like a completely different person from the man who'd stood triumphantly at Marcello's just 72 hours earlier. His Armani suit was wrinkled and stained, the same one from the party. His Princeton class ring was conspicuously absent from his finger, likely pawned for quick cash. The designer stubble he carefully maintained had grown into an actual unkempt beard, and his eyes had the hollow look of someone who hadn't slept in days. I opened the door but didn't invite him in, letting him stand on the step while I remained in my doorway, coffee mug in hand. The morning was crisp, and I noticed him shivering slightly in his wrinkled suit jacket. "Please," he said, and the words seemed to physically hurt him. It came out cracked and foreign, like his mouth had never formed those syllables before. This man who'd commanded boardrooms and dominated conversations couldn't even meet my eyes as he stood on my doorstep like a beggar. "Please what, Jake?" I asked, taking a sip of my coffee. "The company is gone. Everything is frozen. My parents are losing their house. Emma and Sophia can't graduate. The SEC is investigating me personally for misrepresentation of technological assets to investors." His voice broke on the last word. "Just tell me what you want. Tell me how to fix this." "You can't fix this," I replied simply. "You can only live with the consequences of your choices, just as you expected me to live with mine." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a crumpled envelope. "My lawyer said to give you this." The letterhead from Fuller & Associates was impressive, as was the thickness of the packet. 23 pages of legal threats claiming extortion, theft of trade secrets, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and various other creative interpretations of criminal law. I smiled as I flipped through it, recognizing the desperate language of attorneys who knew they had no case but needed to justify their retainer. "You should go," I told Jake, starting to close the door. "This isn't over," he said, finding a spark of his old arrogance. "My lawyers will destroy you, that afternoon." I forwarded the Fuller & Associates packet to Catherine Blackwood, my attorney at Blackstone Legal. Catherine was brilliant, ruthless, and had been preparing for this exact scenario for months. Within 2 hours, she'd crafted a response that included documentation proving I owned every line of code Meridian Capital relied upon. She attached the audio recording from the coffee shop where Julia discussed Jake's plan to cut Lexi out completely once the investors are secured. She included emails between Jake and David Lawson planning my termination. Every threat Fuller & Associates had made became evidence of Jake's attempted theft of my intellectual property. 2 days later, my doorbell rang again. This time, the security camera showed Alexandra Thornton standing on my steps. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, her blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail. Gone was the white dress and perfect makeup from Marcello's. She looked younger, more vulnerable, and surprisingly nervous. I opened the door but again didn't invite her in. "I'm not here as Jake's anything," she said quickly. "I'm here because I've been gathering evidence of his fraudulent dealings with client portfolios. He's been using my position at Goldman to access insider information." She held out a flash drive. "Everything is on here. Trade records, emails, recorded conversations where he explicitly discusses using material non-public information." I studied her for a moment. "Why would you give this to me?" "Because he destroyed my career the same way he tried to destroy yours. The only difference is you saw it coming and fought back." She paused. "I thought perhaps we could work together." I took the flash drive but shook my head. "I appreciate this, but I don't need an alliance. I have everything required to ensure Jake faces appropriate consequences." I reached into my pocket and handed her a business card. "This is the SEC investigator who's been calling me. He would be very interested in what you've documented." Alexandra took the card, nodded once and walked away. I closed the door and returned to my laptop, where another dozen system alerts confirmed that Jake's world continued its methodical collapse. I closed the door behind Alexandra and returned to my laptop, where Catherine Blackwood had just sent an email marked urgent. The Meridian Capital Board had called an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. They wanted to discuss the technological crisis and had discovered, through their frantic investigation, that all roads led back to Nemesis Holdings. Catherine had already informed them that I would be attending, not as Jake's estranged wife, but as the controlling owner of their entire technical infrastructure. The next morning, I dressed in a navy suit I'd purchased specifically for this moment. Not designer, not flashy, just professionally elegant in a way that said I meant business. The Meridian Capital offices occupied the 32nd floor of a Manhattan high-rise, the same building where I'd once served coffee to investors who looked through me. This time, when I walked through those glass doors, the receptionist's eyes widened in recognition and confusion. The boardroom fell silent when I entered. 7 board members sat around the polished mahogany table, including Jake, who looked like he'd aged 5 years in the past week. David Lawson was there, his Wharton MBA useless in the face of actual technical complexity. Harrison Sr. occupied his usual seat, despite no longer being able to afford the parking garage fee for the building. I didn't take the chair they'd set for me at the far end of the table. Instead, I walked to the presentation screen and connected my laptop with practiced efficiency. The first slide appeared showing the complete ownership structure of the Pythia algorithm. "Gentlemen," I began, noting how they flinched at my formal address. "You called this meeting to discuss your technological crisis. Let me clarify your position. Every line of code that Meridian Capital depends upon belongs to Nemesis Holdings, which is wholly owned by me. The licensing agreements you've been operating under expired the moment Jake publicly announced our divorce at Marcello's, triggering the morality clause in subsection 12. I clicked to the next slide showing the patent filings, all dated and registered under my name before Meridian Capital existed. I created the Pythia algorithm during my doctoral work at MIT. The patents were filed under my maiden name, Lexington Brooks, which is why your due diligence never found them." Board member Marcus Webb, a silver-haired venture capitalist who'd always been the most pragmatic of the group, leaned forward. "What do you want?" I smiled and advanced to the next slide. "You have two options. Option 1. Recognize me as founder and majority owner of Meridian Capital, with 70% equity based on the valuation of the intellectual property I created. Jake retains 5%. The board splits the remaining 25%. Option 2. I sell everything to Quantum Partners for pennies on the dollar, and you explain to your investors why their portfolios are now worthless." "This is extortion," Jake spat, finding his voice for the first time. "No," I replied calmly. "This is capitalism. I own something you need. I'm offering to sell it to you at a fair price. The fact that you never bothered to secure ownership of your company's fundamental technology is not my problem to solve." The board exchanged glances. They were trapped and everyone in the room knew it. Without Pythia, Meridian Capital was just another investment firm with nice offices and no competitive advantage. "We need time to discuss," Webb said carefully. "You have 1 hour," I replied, closing my laptop. "My attorney is waiting in the lobby with the contracts. Decide quickly, because Quantum Partners is eager to acquire these assets." I spent that hour in a coffee shop across the street, watching through the window as messenger after messenger arrived at the building, likely lawyers and advisors being summoned for emergency consultation. When I returned, the contracts were signed. I was now the majority owner of the company I'd built from nothing. 3 days later, the Wall Street Journal published their investigation. The headline stretched across the front page of the business section, "The Ghost Genius Who Built and Rebuilt Meridian Capital." The reporter, Susan Chen, had done her homework. She'd interviewed Professor Morrison from MIT, who confirmed I'd been the sole creator of the Pythia algorithm. She'd spoken with former employees who remembered me coding through the night, while Jake attended networking events. The timeline was devastating, showing how each of Meridian's major successes corresponded with improvements I'd made to the algorithm, while my systematic erasure from company records coincided with Jake bringing in his Princeton network. The article included a photo from my MIT graduation, standing with my doctoral advisor beside a presentation board showing the early framework of Pythia. Next to it was a recent photo of Jake at an industry conference, presenting my work as his own innovation. The contrast was damning. My phone buzzed with interview requests from CNBC, Bloomberg, and Forbes, but I declined them all. The truth was public now, and I had more important work to do. I scheduled a meeting with Quantum Partners, not as a desperate seller, but as someone with assets to leverage. We met in their conference room overlooking Central Park, the same room where Jake had once pitched them on a partnership they'd declined. $40 million for the complete Pythia algorithm, I stated simply. Non-exclusive license with a 5-year non-compete clause for the financial sector. They agreed within 10 minutes. The wire transfer was confirmed by lunch. That afternoon, I signed the lease for Athena Financial's offices, 6 floors below where Meridian Capital was beginning its death spiral. I'd already recruited my team, Dr. Sarah Chen, whom the Federal Reserve had passed over for promotion 3 times despite her groundbreaking work in monetary policy modelling. Jessica Martinez, whose revolutionary risk assessment algorithms had been credited to her male supervisor at Goldman. Amy Patterson, a coder whose innovations in high-frequency trading had made millions for firms that refused to promote her beyond junior developer. As we stood in our new offices looking out at the city skyline, Sarah raised her coffee mug in a toast to the overlooked and underestimated. While we were celebrating our beginning, Jake was facing his end. The SEC investigation had uncovered years of misrepresentation to investors. With Alexandra's evidence, they had proof of insider trading. His Princeton partners distanced themselves publicly, claiming they'd been deceived about the technology's origins. David Lawson resigned and returned to consulting. The investors pulled their funds en masse, and within 2 weeks, Meridian Capital existed only on paper. Harrison Sr. filed for bankruptcy on a Tuesday. The Southampton estate was sold at auction to cover debts. Margaret moved in with her sister in New Jersey, her social standing destroyed. Emma and Sophia transferred to state schools, taking jobs at department stores to pay rent on the small apartment they now shared. The Harrison dynasty, built on borrowed brilliance and stolen innovation, had crumbled completely. My mother arrived the following week, taking the train from Ohio because she said she wanted to see everything properly. When she walked into Athena Financial's offices and saw my name on the door as CEO and founder, she stopped and touched the lettering with trembling fingers. "You didn't just survive, baby." "You soared," my mother said, her fingers still touching the lettering on my office door. She turned to me with tears streaming down her face, and I realised I was crying too. Not from sadness or anger, but from something I hadn't felt in years. Pure, uncomplicated pride in what I'd built with my own hands and mind. We stood in Athena Financial's reception area as my team prepared for our first major client presentation. The energy in the office was electric, nothing like the suffocating atmosphere at Meridian where everyone performed for Jake's approval. Here, Sarah was explaining her monetary policy model to Jessica, who was incorporating it into her risk assessment framework. Amy had 3 monitors displaying code that would revolutionize how we process market data. We were collaborating, building on each other's ideas, creating something greater than the sum of our parts. The client presentation went flawlessly. Hartman Industries signed a 3-year contract worth $12 million annually, specifically citing their confidence in working with the actual creator of the Pythia algorithm, rather than someone who merely took credit for it. By the end of our first month, Athena Financial's returns exceeded Meridian's best quarter by 30%. We weren't just succeeding, we were setting new industry standards. Word spread quickly through the financial sector. 3 more brilliant women reached out, each with stories painfully similar to mine. Dr. Lisa Chen, whose quantitative models had generated millions for her previous firm, while she remained stuck in middle management. Rebecca Torres, a Harvard MBA whose strategic innovations were consistently presented by her male colleagues as their own ideas. Maria Petrov, whose coding brilliance had built entire trading platforms while being paid half what junior male developers earned. I hired them all. Our office expanded to include the entire floor, and the atmosphere was unlike anything I'd experienced in corporate America. We shared ideas openly, credited each other's contributions meticulously, and celebrated successes as a team. There was no hierarchy of whose voice mattered more, no performance of authority, just brilliant minds working together toward a common goal. 6 months after Athena's launch, I attended the Financial Innovation Conference in Chicago, not as someone's +1 or administrative support, but as a keynote speaker. The organisers had specifically requested I present on algorithmic trading in the new economy. I stood backstage adjusting the microphone, wearing a simple black dress I'd chosen myself. When I saw him across the convention floor, Jake was manning a booth for Brennan & Associates, a third-tier firm that mostly handled small municipal bonds. His Tom Ford suits had been replaced by off-the-rack polyester that pulled slightly at the shoulders. The Princeton class ring was still absent, and his hair had started thinning in a way that expensive treatments could no longer hide. He was explaining something to a potential client who looked thoroughly unimpressed, desperately trying to project the authority he once wore so naturally. Our eyes met across the crowded convention floor. For a moment, time seemed to pause. I saw recognition flash across his face, followed immediately by something I never thought I'd see from Jake Harrison: shame. He looked away first, turning his back to me, as if suddenly fascinated by the display materials behind him. The man who'd called me a failure in front of 40 people couldn't face the woman who'd rebuilt herself from the ashes of his betrayal. I delivered my keynote to a standing ovation. The audience of 500 industry professionals listened as I explained the next evolution of algorithmic trading, innovations that went far beyond what Pythia had accomplished. During the Q&A session, someone asked about my journey from MIT to founding Athena Financial. I told the truth simply and without bitterness about how being erased from my own creation had taught me the importance of ownership, documentation, and never allowing anyone to diminish your contributions. After the conference, I used $10 million from the Quantum Partners sale to establish the Nemesis Foundation. The name was deliberate, a reminder that sometimes justice comes from unexpected places. The foundation would provide funding, mentorship, and legal support for women whose technological contributions had been stolen, erased, or appropriated. Professor Thomas Morrison from MIT agreed to serve on the board, helping identify candidates whose brilliance was being systematically overlooked. Our first grant went to a programmer in Seattle whose machine learning innovations had been patented under her supervisor's name. The second went to a team of 3 women whose startup had been destroyed by a hostile takeover that claimed their technology as pre-existing intellectual property. Within 6 months, we were supporting 27 women across the country, each one building something extraordinary from the ruins of what had been taken from them. One evening, as I stood in my office overlooking the Hudson River, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I knew immediately it was Jake. He'd probably gotten a new phone after his previous one was disconnected for non-payment. The message was short. You destroyed everything. I took a photo of Athena Financial's latest success, our feature in Forbes as one of the top 10 most innovative financial firms in America, and sent it as my reply. Then I deleted his number and blocked it, feeling the last thread connecting us finally sever. He was right in a way. I had destroyed everything built on lies, theft, and the systematic erasure of my contributions. But from that destruction, I'd built something infinitely better. I called my mother, who answered on the first ring as always. "Mum, I've been looking at apartments near me. There's a beautiful 2-bedroom in my building, with a view of the river. It has a reading nook perfect for your book club meetings over video." Her sharp intake of breath told me everything. "Lexi, I couldn't afford—" "Mom, I can afford it." "We can afford it. You supported me through everything. Let me give something back." As she cried happy tears on the other end of the phone, I looked at my reflection in the darkened window. The woman staring back wasn't the invisible wife who'd served coffee while others claimed her work. She wasn't the victim who'd been publicly humiliated at her own birthday dinner. She was someone who'd taken the worst moment of her life and transformed it into the foundation for something extraordinary. The best revenge, I realized, wasn't just reclaiming what was stolen or watching those who wronged you fall. It was building something so magnificent that their betrayal became merely a footnote in your success story. Jake had thought he was ending my story that night at Marcello's. Instead, he'd freed me to write a better one. My phone buzzed with emails from potential clients, partnership offers, and interview requests. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to grow Athena Financial into something even greater. But tonight, I simply stood in my office, watching the lights of the city twinkle below, finally at peace with the journey that had brought me here. The woman who'd once made herself small to fit into Jake Harrison's world had discovered something powerful in its destruction that, sometimes the most devastating, betrayal can become the catalyst for your greatest triumph. And as I looked out at the city that had witnessed both my lowest moment and my highest achievement, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was soaring. If this story of calculated revenge and ultimate triumph kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now. My favourite part was when Lexi slid that black envelope across the marble table at Marcello's, knowing she'd just triggered 7 minutes of total financial destruction. What was your favourite moment? Drop it in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you want more stories of brilliant women turning betrayal into triumph, make sure you're subscribed with notifications on. Because trust me, the next story will leave you just as satisfied as watching Jake Harrison lose everything he'd stolen.